And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us on the podcast, Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest is Brian Bergford. Brian is a professional speaker, he's a peak performance coach, a competitive athlete, and the owner of Bergford Performance Systems. He specializes in helping motivated and athletic CEOs, entrepreneurs, and business owners master their mental training game and take their businesses, athletic pursuits, and lives to the next level. I'm pretty excited about this because Brian is an interesting fellow, and he's going to share his sort of journey with us. So, welcome aboard today. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me, Peter. I'm really excited to be with you.
Great. So, your work is sounds to me like the combination of lots of things that you're passionate about. Do you want to touch on sort of the why you do what you do, and then we'll talk about the how a little bit.
Yeah, so I think that the central core of what I do, and I've always come back to, is loving to study and understand and help coach people to the pinnacle of human performance in whatever their discipline happens to be. So I love that aspect, and everything kind of revolves around that. That's sort of the nucleus, if you will. But there's other things around that that are really helpful and supportive. I think you mentioned that I compete. I'm a swimmer. We actually have the state championships coming up this weekend, so I'm getting all geared up and ready to go into that.
Very cool.
Yeah, yeah. And my background is in psychology. Just always had a passion for what creates proper mindsets and what's behind people's psychology and driving them to do the behaviors and the actions and make the choices that they do. That's super fascinating for me, and especially when. So I also had some background in like personal training and strength training and conditioning with athletes. And one thing I realized a long time ago was that my niche and the people that I loved working with wasn't so much just like the general public, if you will. It was really top high performing athletes because they brought a lot to the table. They had batteries included. And so what I could do, right, is just come in there and support that and help them take things to the next level. I have a couple successful companies I built up in the dog training and behavior rehabilitation space. And so when I had those up to speed and management in place, I was really able to come back and have this purpose built platform that is Bergford Performance Systems, that's really about going deep with people and getting and focusing on that aspect of it and making sure that people get everything out of their lives they want to, not only in terms of achievements, but making sure there's a lot of satisfaction that really keeps driving and makes all of that performance sustainable.
Now let's sort of pivot to the business side of it. So I love sort of the holistic perspective and the integration and the choices that you've made in terms of being fascinated by high performers and the psychology, and then you yourself are one as well, even though you're a bit humble, pretty accomplished swimmer and athlete in your own right. How do you then wake up and say, I think there's a business here, or what might a business of this nature look like?
So that's a great question. And I love it for this reason. I think that sort of the heartbeat and the sort of soul cry of everything I wanted to do just kept driving me back to this. And one of the qualities that I think that I have, and sometimes it works out great, sometimes not so much, but it's been a net benefit essentially.
Right.
I just believe that I will figure it out. I will find a way, I will figure it out, I will make it something that's viable. So I think just having that has really supported everything. And then going along the way, it's kind of a bumpy path. And you have to figure out like how does this all work, and especially because like that industry for me is so much different than some of the other ones that I functioned in. I had to like relearn sort of everything, and I kind of felt like a little bit of a dipwad in this new
That's a
space.
technical term, I think. Dipwad.
It is
Right.
a
Yeah.
technical term, and I made sure I pronounced it right. I looked it up before we got on today,
Yes.
but I felt kind of silly in it because I I was used to being kind of in a lane that I knew really, really, really well, and I was super comfortable in. And so kind of making that leap was really challenging for me.
So I wanna touch on that for a minute because I love the parallels, right? So if you're a swimmer, there are systems and processes and methodologies and ways to train in order to be a better swimmer and to compete better, right? And it involves
Yeah.
nutrition and health and science. You mentioned earlier, dog training and behavior. There are systems and processes in place that work, and then there's other tools that you have that work situationally, etc. When people make the leap, if you will, into the content world and say the business side, there is no sort of one best way. There is no, here's the 7 things that you need to do, and you do each of them for this many reps, and then voila, you're a world class speaker, right? So I love sort of the discomfort that you've got in sort of this, discomfort combined with the mindset of, well, geez, I'll figure it out. But there is a bit of discomfort because there isn't a playbook.
Right. And I think a lot of it is recognizing that, and for also for people that have kind of they feel stuck and maybe they're not performing at the levels that they were accustomed to in the past, but they're getting older, whatever is going on. And they have to step into a totally different plane of performing on a different field, and just
Yeah,
understanding
yeah,
that the pinnacle of their personal performance is not necessarily going to look like what it used to. And I think going into it, like you said, there's not a right way to do something like content. I mean, there's so much out there, and depending on everybody you talk to is going to give you a different answer. And I think one of the key fundamentals that I just mantra in my own head
right.
is really homing in on what delivery methods are going to resonate with my audience the best, and where my voice comes through in the most authentic fashion possible. Those are the things that I'm going to double and triple down on.
Okay, but let's add the layer, and I want to go back to the question. So I think that's right, but the third piece, and I think too often authors and thought leaders either neglect it or don't want to address it, or it's a little awkward. And it also has to serve you, right? Because if you're only serving the other 2 elements, but you're not able to make a living, it won't be sustainable, and the market will force you to do other things. So can you talk a little bit about some things that you've tried that work, and some things that you've tried from a content monetization perspective that maybe didn't work so well?
I think that um, things have sort of worked in spurts. I can tell you what tends to work best for me, because I'm sort of an auditory person, is things like, podcasting makes sense. I'm also a speaker,
Okay.
so that kind of comes pretty naturally to me. Writing as well. I can get in front of a camera as well, so that definitely helps. I think one of the things I'm experimenting with and really rolling into right now that'll be of interest, and I think help answer that question, because previously I was doing all one-on-one coaching,
Right. So
basically.
not
It's just like
scalable.
one-on-one with a not scalable,
Right.
but a handful of clients and a core group, and like not inexpensive at all, but it allows me to focus all my energies on those people and help them get everything that they want. But moving forward, okay, from a scale standpoint and being able to reach more people, I'm working on building out an online sort of masterclass, if
Okay.
you will, on performance and some of the systems that I've developed out to give people a really firm foundation, particularly for people who are hard charging type A personalities, athletes, CEOs, entrepreneurs, people that fit in that bucket. And they're a little bit burned out, but they know there's a lot more in the basement, so to speak. And they really want to get back to performing well, but they're kind of stuck and in a spot. And it's about going back to fundamentals and making sure the systems are in place. So rolling out an online course is something totally new to me, and we shall see how that works.
Okay. So, but let me touch on that, but because one of the things that you just said there is you designed it, you've got a specific end user in mind, right? So it's that, type A, hard charging, successful, etc., that is stuck, whatever that means, right? There's more in the tank. They're not getting there. That's interesting because that's partly demographic and partly psychographic, right? So I don't think you can get a list on, Facebook or something. Can you give me a list of all the stuck people, right? It's easier to find 45 to 54 vegans that, are cyclists than stuck people. So how do you go about finding stuck people?
Yeah, so this is an area where perhaps you can help me.
Okay.
Because I completely agree with you, and it's not. I don't pretend to be like a master in that space necessarily. I think from a thought leadership
Okay.
perspective, I bring more to the table with that, and I'm maybe more of like a case study of like, hey, maybe people should, they can kind of follow my journey through this piece, and I think that might be really interesting. But I'm not necessarily the best at the content space, but um, like I said,
Well, you want to let's play with that a little bit, actually. So I think this might be fun to play with a little bit. So if I were in your shoes and I was looking for, because I love the way you described the type A side, because I see that,
Mhm.
and then the stuck side, right? I get that. One thing that you could do is anybody, like, say, let's say, for example, on LinkedIn, that is this, let's pick a level, managing director, CEO, maybe it's a founder, right? We got to figure out a title there,
Yeah.
but also puts volunteers information like, and an Ironman, right? And a triathlete, and to something. Like if somebody's putting that in their LinkedIn, which is obviously more of a professional platform than a Facebook, it's really part of their core, right? If they're willing to put it out there. And then, that might be a starting point to look there. And then maybe, I hate to use age as a marker, but age could be a marker because we tend to run a little bit slower at 45 than we did at 35. And there's, that's just life. So maybe it could be anyone that's self-selecting there, and you could determine based on when they graduated school or how long they've been in the workforce, whatever, that they're whatever, let's say 45 and older. Would that how would that how does that resonate?
No, that would I think that's a great suggestion, both of them, because the demographics, like you said, is a little tough, but you can sort of do your best educated guess, and I think that's a really good point. Also, the LinkedIn piece about how people are profiling themselves and self-identifying, because a lot of it, yeah, there is a demographic side, but the psychographic side, like you said, it's hard to go. You cannot go into like a Facebook ad and they say like, send me the people that are truly driven, but not the ones that they say that just say they are the ones who actually can get the job done and have what it takes.
Right, right.
And I want to make sure that they're athletic and currently burned out. So I think those are great suggestions.
Right, and by the way, can afford my rates, which are blah, blah, blah,
Exactly.
right? Right, and can
Yes.
afford that, yeah. No, I get it. And therein lies the challenge of content, but I think, the more effort you put into that, the better. Okay, so that's going back to the original piece, so that's one sort of lane that you're going down now, is developing this sort of online piece. You gotta find your end users because therein lies the zillion-dollar situation for most. Can you share with us maybe one or two things that you've tried that have not worked out so well, and how you went about sort of testing? Because I don't think that trying and failing is a bad thing. I just look at all of this as one big experiment, and eventually you find the ones that work and you eliminate the ones that don't. So can you give us an example of one or two that haven't panned out so well?
Yeah, I can give you an example of something that didn't work well at all was when I was not on social media platforms whatsoever.
Yeah. Okay. There
So
you go.
that was a little problematic for me because it's just literally I was just sort of like I don't my whole thing is I have so much mental bandwidth, and so to have all these open windows in my head, so to speak, and to add more to that was just to me, I'm like, this is crazy. But then I saw that the craziness was like not even being engaged there. So on it, that's more of something that I just wasn't doing for a long time, and so it kind of put me behind the curve a little bit because
So wait, but I want to pause you there
yeah,
because I hear that a lot. The themes that I hear are either I don't get it, not for me, I'm not a Twitter guy or gal, like so I'm just not going to play there, or listen, I'm incredibly disciplined and this is how I spend my time. I work out in the mornings and then I read and then I work, and like there's no room in there for, I mean, that's junk food for me, so I'm not going to partake of it. But I want to touch on that because the reality is if your market's there, and by the way, they're not in social media as a generic thing, they're in various platforms, right? You might have an audience that's maybe you're in something that's visual and they're Instagrammy, or more corporate and they're LinkedIn. So I love that you made the leap to sort of go in there, not because you were curious, but because you sort of had to, right, to be part of the conversation is what it sounds like.
yeah, exactly. I think that what really kicked it over the edge was basically getting shamed on it so horrifically by watching like Gary Vaynerchuk stuff. I mean, that was just sort of like, getting kicked in the face about that over and over. I was like, that totally makes sense. And also recognizing and being able to see forward. And this is where the world is going. And like the media of yesteryear is not what it's is now and where it's going in the future. And I don't want to be left behind. And I think a lot of it was just a lack of understanding and having context for what those platforms, all the different pieces were actually, and the incredible opportunity that was out there to take advantage of that and build audiences and to go in and experiment and do things where, again, back in the era of you had to put ads on TV where that's unbelievably cost prohibitive. Now we sort of have this playground where it's not overly expensive yet, and so you can still have people that are smaller players be able to go in there and get their bearings about them.
Got it. And how did you prevent it? Because it sounded like there was a little bit of a fear, and it will overtake my life at some level, right? So how do you do that in a structured and disciplined way, where I would imagine you have an incredible amount of structure and discipline given your athletic background. So how do you sort of integrate social media to be a component of, or to have a place where it fits, but it's not consuming all your bandwidth?
One advantage I believe that I have is I'm fairly self-aware and self-disciplined. I don't need people
Right. Right.
typically standing around telling me to get to work or to stop doing something that's idiotic and
Right.
wasting
Right.
my time. So I have the benefit of, if I'm on social media and I start going and like getting sucked into it, there's this little thing that goes off in my head and I'm like, you're wasting time. And this is going to pull away
Okay.
from other things that are more important. So that's one thing, but that's very personal. I think other people, it's tougher, so they need systems
Sure.
in place. And to make sure that I do things like post to different platforms, I literally have to put blocks of time in my calendar that's just dedicated to social media to make sure that I get it done, because it's not necessarily something I find enjoyable at all. Uh,
Okay.
but it's something I can use to contribute to others. And I think if I can get my message out there and impact people, I'm totally willing to do it. But I have block times, and I also have this little timer in my head that goes off.
Good. And then I'm assuming that there's also some KPIs or measurement of, hey, if I'm spending 3 hours a week on this, my expectation is X, or I'm gonna, watch the feedback and modify and pivot and adjust accordingly. Is that, sort of the equivalent of watching the game tapes? How do you deal with that?
So I just accepted that when I'm putting out content, that is a long that's playing the long game. That's going to be something that
Yeah,
has compounding effects. So I've tried not to get my britches too much in a bunch over, gosh, I have to see like these huge results right away, because I know that that would just be unbelievably discouraging and make me feel like I'm totally wasting
got it.
my time. And so what I try and do is take short blocks of time and just let that compound. It's sort of like the investment
Okay,
side.
good,
Yeah.
great. And I don't think anyone's used the word britches yet on the show, so congratulations. We've got
I wanted to be a first for something today.
that was we're bringing britches back. There you
Alright,
go.
bringing britches
There
back, I
you
love
go.
it. Cue the
Cool.
DJ, that sounds like a song.
Dancing to cool. So, as we start to wrap up here, I appreciate your transparency in the journey, and it's obviously a work in progress, right? In terms of the content and the online piece, and I'd love to check back in a couple months and see how things unfolded. What would you advise someone who is on the cusp? Maybe there's sort of where you might have been a while ago, where there's a couple things they're passionate about. There's a couple things, some of those things they're really good at, and there's potentially a market opportunity to sort of dive into that as a content expert. What are the couple of words of advice you might give Brian?
I would say make sure that it's not something you're doing to just find something new and exciting that you can run with, but it is truly something, if you're very honest with yourself, there's like a draw and a pull that you cannot get away from. Because when you find something like
I love
that,
that. Yeah.
again, you're going to find a way to make it through all the obstacles and all the crap that's going to happen to you. So I think that's one of the central themes. And I feel like if you locate that and you're absolutely tapped into it, that's a fuel and a power source that is going to generate forward momentum. And if you're the type of person that can make true commitments and keep to them, once you flip that switch, baby, like it's over. So it's like, find out what the core desire is. And if you're going to flip the switch, flip the flip and switch. Don't stand there and fiddle around with it. When you make the commitment, don't rush into commitment, but once you make it, you go 100%.
Right. So it's sort of the passion meets the discipline, right? Because just I meet so many people that they're oh, I'm passionate about X. And it's like, okay, well, where's the discipline? Because passion without discipline is the embers aren't going to turn into sparks, right? They're not going to flame up. So I love that.
Completely
Um,
agree with you. Yeah, people are like, I'm really passionate about this, or I want this so bad. And whenever I hear stuff like that, it kind of zeroes out in my mind. I don't care at all.
yeah,
I want to see what, right? Can that fire translate into something that can get traction on the ground? And do you know how to work? Because you don't deserve what you want really, really bad. You
sure.
deserve what you earn and what you work for. And I think that's an important difference.
Awesome. Well, this has been great. I appreciate your time and I appreciate the candor, and looking forward to seeing how things unfold for you. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me on. I definitely appreciate your time too.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.